610 WTVN.
Right now, pleasure to welcome Joel Patterson to the live line. Joel, a workplace culture expert. And it's funny, Joel, with all the different ramifications of the pandemic, first off, it was, a lot of people talking furlough and being worried about being ill. Then it was, kind of settled into working from the house, a lot of Zoom and different types of virtual meetings. Now we're to the point where we're trying to get back to normal. We're actually trying to figure out how to get that water cooler talk and keeping up with your buds at work, aren't we?
Yeah, that's for sure. It's we've all gotten a little bit worn out, I think, of being home alone or home with your family, maybe even. Right. But there's things that you can do, right? I mean, there's things that you can do to make sure that you stay connected to people, that you know what's going on. I mean, one of the things that I like to do, even just simple things, right before our monthly meetings that we have, I always throw up a puzzle or a riddle or something on the screen 10 to 15 minutes before we get started so the people that are logged in can have something to chat about. Anything to really encourage conversation among the team, because they're not having that when they're wandering around in the office is going to be a good thing for them long term.
Yeah, you don't really think about it 100%, but, from what I've read, being at home, working from home on the computer and whatnot, we're a little more productive. We actually are working a little more as far as time goes. And because, we're not caught up in, like I'd say, you just that normal chit chat we do around the office. We've apparently gotten a little more efficient. I would think as a boss, you'd be totally down with all that stuff. As a business owner, it's like, hey, right on. But just as humanity, we kind of need those little, checks in with our buddies and kind of downtime just for mental health.
Yeah, for sure. And, the problem is there's no separation for a lot of people when they're home between work and play. They may be sitting in the exact same spot when they're doing their work during the day, and that makes them more productive because they don't have the typical distractions that might exist in the office. But then in the evening time, when they're starting to spend time with their family, they might be sitting in the same spot.
Yeah.
And it's great in the near term, but long term, people are going to get burned out. They need to find ways to make sure that they're staying connected to things that are going on that aren't just a day-to-day task. Otherwise, they're just going to, at some point, it's going to impact them negatively. And if we don't, as leaders of businesses, stay on top of that, we're going to start losing people.
Yeah, I think about my own life, my own trajectory as far as work goes. And, post-college, not uncommon for me, to have multiple jobs. And maybe we work in 80, 90, 100 hours a week. But then, as you get married, have family, and other concerns start to take over, you don't really want to spend as much time on that. You really do, kind of as you march through your work life, you kind of need that checkout time. You need that kind of mental downtime away from work. So when you come back to it, you're fresh and you got good perspective.
Yeah, you don't realize it either when you're in the middle of it. Like, I've heard people say this all the time, where it wasn't until I stepped back and was able to create some space in my head that I was really able to advance in my career. It seems counterintuitive, but you really need to be able to pull back a little bit for your mind to just kind of relax and think about what you want to do next. You mentioned working 80 hours a week, and you always feel really productive, or usually you feel productive if you're putting that kind of time in. But the reality is you're probably losing out on a bigger picture item because you haven't been able to spend any time thinking about it. And that water cooler talk really plays into that too. You think about the opportunities that may present themselves just by passing somebody in the hallway or being in an elevator with somebody, where you have a casual conversation that you might learn about an opportunity or you might share an opportunity. Those are the little moments that really, when you look back on your career, you'll be surprised how many times those impacted your overall direction.
Joel Patterson, our guest, he's a workplace culture expert. It really, Joel, it's about being a human being. If you're just, productive employee number 206, people appreciate what you're doing, but they don't really get to know you. When you have those interactions in the hallways, elevators, whatever, you become a three-dimensional person with a family and other concerns, and now people actually get to know you. That's good.
Yeah, it's absolutely good. It makes you vulnerable, too. It allows you to share things that you might not share otherwise. And that's really how you develop connection with people. If you can tell them something that you've gone through, that they can also recognize that they've gone through. You start sharing those experiences, and those are the people that you remember long term. And again, there's things that you can do. You can kind of force the issue a little bit in these days of Zoom. This is kind of a crazy one that I did the other day. I actually cut somebody's hair virtually. I mean, he was next to me. I've never cut anybody's hair in my life. And I had a virtual stylist telling me what to do on one Zoom call, and then we had the rest of the company on another Zoom call. And it was stressful as could be for me, but it was fun, and it allowed me to screw up somebody's hair, and we all got a good laugh out of it. And it was in a situation I've never experienced or anybody else has before, and it's something that we can remember and talk about in the future.
Yeah, I as you're talking about that, I got to believe. There's at least one member on the team that is just like, what are we doing? This is such a waste of time. If you get that person that is a part of the team and they just want to be about the efficient and whatever, do you just leave them out of that kind of activity, or do you try to convince them that this is good for the group and ultimately good for the company?
Yeah, that's a great question, because that really goes back to whether or not you're hiring the right kind of people for your culture. But you're right. There's always at least one of those people that's there. I've found that as long as you continue to be consistent with what your beliefs and values are, those people will either get on board or they'll ultimately leave. I mean, that's one good thing about a strong culture, and that's not a bad thing. Just because they don't fit in doesn't mean that they're a bad person or anything.
Yeah.
There's probably just another place that is better fit for them.
And that's like, I almost feel like sometimes you got to beat somebody over the head with that. Like, hey, we don't think you're a bad employee. You just don't fit here. We're just going to have to part ways. Does that usually come from the management side of things, or does that usually come from the employee? Like the employee realizes this just is not for me.
I think it typically comes from the employee. I mean, again, it's not a good or a bad thing, but they want to be somewhere that they feel comfortable and that they have like-minded beliefs and values. And we have a company and an organization that is pretty lively and fun. And some people, you're right, just don't enjoy that aspect. And typically, it just sort of takes care of itself.
I got it. So, I mean, should I schedule the kind of virtual water cooler talk, or like you try to jump on 15 minutes ahead or hang out 15 minutes afterward just to see if there's any takers?
I think you do both. I think you got to make sure that you're intentional about it. If you're not being intentional, it's not going to happen on its own. You can't just assume that your people are going to get on a little bit early and talk about it, because everybody, when your call's at 1 o'clock these days, you log in at 1 o'clock, right? And so you've got to be intentional about, when you've got everybody together, or even just scheduling something and they may not know it, but you schedule something that's a meeting, but that really turns into something that's a session for them to just get together, discuss an issue, play something like Two Truths and a Lie. Everybody's done that.
Right.
Just anything that gets the conversation flowing is going to serve you well in the long run.
Really, really good stuff. Joel, thanks so much. Perfect for a Friday. Appreciate it. Have a great weekend. Joel Patterson there on News Radio 610 WTVN.